Welcome to Writing for Psychology featuring Jane Halonen along with me, Garth Neufeld. This 7-part Psych session series features conversations around topics related to writing in psychology, from finding opportunities to finding inspiration and so much more. Quite simply, this was my personal attempt to learn something from one of the masters in our field and to share it with you, our audience. We hope you enjoy it. Jane Halonen, welcome to our final episode of this Writing for Psych mini-series on Psych sessions. You ready for one more?
Yes, but I'm so sad to see it come to an end. It's been a lot of fun.
I know. We were just talking before the recording started that we're going to miss these Friday meetings with each other. And but you do have a department meeting after this, so that'll be fun too.
Okay.
Some
people might describe it as such. We'll wait and withhold judgment on that.
Okay. All right. Well, we at some point in this conversation decided that we need to have that student-related writing conversation or writing-related student conversation. I'm not sure which one it is, but lots of the things that we were talking about in the preceding episodes were really faculty-focused, though. We couldn't help ourselves from time to time. We'd get into the weeds with students and thought, let's pull that out for an entire conversation. So, remind us in the courses you teach across the curriculum. Are you teaching from freshman to senior?
I do teach freshman to senior, and I've taught graduate students as well. This semester, both the one that I just finished and the one that's coming up, I'm only teaching junior, senior level classes.
Okay.
But I do teach an intro class.
Right.
So
I think over your career, you've taught all the students.
Oh, no question about that.
Right. And from my perspective, I teach a lot of underprepared first and second year students at a community college level. So I think this will be an interesting conversation to kind of compare notes too about like what is a 4-year institution? What does 4-year institution writing expectation look like versus 2-year? And it may not be different actually, but so where do we start? And maybe we start developmentally when students are coming into college. What we can assume, how do we, let's talk Psych 100. You and I both know that many of these students won't ever go on to take another Psych class, but we need to kind of assess their learning through writing. So what occurs to you as kind of a good starting point or ending point for a Psych 100 class?
Yeah, I have been blessed with the Psych 100 honors section for the past, it's going on 18 years now. And so I know I don't see the standard fresh person coming in. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, in my honors class, I make them do a hell of a lot of writing. They have to do a reflection every week on the reading that they're doing, either guided by me or strike out on their own to do some kind of creative application. And from the beginning, I highlight that I'm expecting professional level grammar and execution. And fortunately for the honor students, that's not much of a problem. In fact, I have to say that the writing of my honor students sometimes is quite dazzling. But I'm well aware that based on the lunchroom conversations I've had with my colleagues, that there's a general perception that writing used to be bad and it's deteriorating. And so I think your comments about community college and potentially being underprepared, I'd say that probably applies to regional comprehensive universities, which tap the same group.
Right. Yeah. I think a fundamental question that I have, and I've talked to my my English department colleagues about this a little bit, is that I am trying to assess whether students understand something. Let's say in like Psych 100, I'm trying to assess whether, for example, they can apply. That's what you and I have talked about before. That's a huge part of really the learning outcomes for Psych 100 is, can you take these concepts and apply them to your life? And the way that I assess that is largely through writing assignments. I don't do multiple choice tests or anything like that. So I guess the insecurity I have or had once as an instructor is I'm not trained to teach people writing. I am trained to teach people. Actually, I'm not even trained to teach people psychology, as so many of us are not. but I've been doing it for a long time. So that's where I think this can get really weird, because am I assessing the quality of the writing, or am I assessing the substance of what the student is bringing up? And isn't it possible that a student would have all kinds of understanding, but would have a very difficult time putting it into good, clear writing? And that's a conundrum I face, or when I think about this issue. What do you think about that?
Well, I think your observation is right that a student can have a good understanding and have difficulty expressing it. And I've seen a mixture of that. In fact, I was thinking about a student I had many years ago who was really good verbally and awful at writing. Mm-hmm. And that didn't make sense to me because it's word management. And at one point she finally said, I think I figured out writing is just talking on paper. And I think I can do it better now that I understand. I've just been so frightened about what to put down on the page that it's kept me from being able to speak. So I do think the discipline serves as a context for our ability to build the skills that students have in communication, whether they're oral or written. And most of the time, those two things show a positive correlation. Yep. If you understand, you can write about it. If you don't understand, you can't write about it. But I am aware that we do have every once in a while that odd student that presents the challenge of, you have that impression that they know more than they've been able to write down.
Yeah. How do you scaffold student writing in your courses? I've made the mistake before of starting from day one, maybe with an underprepared kind of student population, with something like you just said, which is I want professional grammar. I don't know where that bar is, but complete sentences, professional grammar.
Verbs. I like verbs.
Yeah. Yeah. I've made the mistake of outlining all those criteria right up front and saying, just do these things. And then I realized at some point, not all my students can. And now I've got to scaffold the writing up. I've got to tier it. And do you do anything like that? Or do they have the skills in the classes you teach to do what you're asking them to do?
I'm careful about scaffolding. In fact, in my advanced classes, where I ask them to be reporting on various stages of things that they're doing, which is a form of scaffolding, I teach them how to write a memo to me. And I say up front, look, I'm working on your writing skills at large. I know most of you are not going into graduate school. And so if you're headed into the workforce, I want you to be able to express yourself well on paper. So for this assignment, I want you to do a business memo. Here's what a business memo looks like. Here's what RE: means, to lay all that out, to be able to say, when you write this, you don't have to sign off with cordially, Hannah. Now, I'm very clear. And then I will often give students models of successful reports that have been done before. Or here's a successful literature review. Here's a successful grant review. So that they have some idea of what they're trying to shoot for.
Yeah, I like that idea of models. it's crazy to me that we don't give students models when we're asking them to do certain things. And I'm the first person to say that I was guilty of this for a long time, to think that like outlining criteria would be enough. I don't think any longer that that's quite fair to students, especially from a writing perspective. So I had this situation come up this week. I'm teaching an organizational behavior class, IO Psych, and I had a student. I haven't figured out, this is only my second time teaching it, and I haven't quite figured out who these students are yet. I don't have a good sense of that. But one of the students started submitting early assignments in APA style, really well done in APA style, who knows where this person came from. But then asked me for references. Do you want APA style? Asked it on the public Ask Questions forum. And so forget the fact that that person pretty much has APA style. It seemed like mastered at this point, which was crazy. But if a student says to you, first year student in an IO class or an intro psych class, says, hey, Jane, do you want APA style in my writing? What do you say?
For most of the projects that I do, I would say I at least need a reference list in APA style. Mm-hmm. But if I'm asking students to write grants, that's not going to overlap perfectly with APA. If I'm asking them to write a literature review, or I don't tend to teach experimental, so I don't ask for experimental reports. But if I did, I would say, yes, I want this in APA style, because you're an apprentice in learning APA style. But I think it's the case that the majority of students, even the ones we teach in the advanced courses, in junior and senior courses, most of them will never have to deal with APA format ever again once they graduate. And so I often say that begs the question, why are we insisting they do this? And often my colleagues will say, well, because we're proving that they can follow instructions. So, well, but why would we ask them to do this kind of instruction that has no bearing on their future? So in those cases, in advanced classes, I usually give students options about the kinds of things that they write. They can do a technical report, or they can do a write-up of a service learning project or something like that, where APA format is less relevant. I still ask them to do APA format in their reference list. I still cling to that. It's an old notion, but a lot of the writing that I'm asking students to do, I'm really trying to focus on what will be most useful to them 5 years out. And APA formatted things are not, unless they're going to grad school.
Right. And we know how few students are going to graduate school in That's psychology, correct. Right? It's quite a small
Well, and to add to the confusion, well, I do teach capstone courses every semester, and every semester I say to the students, how many of you are planning on going to grad school either now or in the future? And 70% of the students raise their hands reliably every semester. And then I say back to them, well, that would be unusual, because national statistics suggest that it might be as high as 25%. So it's one of the reasons why when you're doing your planning, you need to make sure that you've got a plan B. Because just because you want to go doesn't mean that grad school is going to open its arms to you.
I love that. I love how a conversation about writing, even with students, and can lead to these kinds of advising moments, or maybe just moments of kind of undoing some beliefs that people have about how common it is to go to graduate school. But really, all that came out of this conversation about writing and why we're doing writing. And I really think that the activities that we do in a classroom should lead to these real life conversations. And now, I want to go back for a second, because you mentioned memos, and you've mentioned these things before. Mm-hmm. You've mentioned these kind of non-typical writing assignments that you do. And I say non-typical because I think in classic, psychology courses, there are APA style papers that I mean, when I got into teaching, I thought multiple choice tests and an APA style kind of major paper at the end of the term. That's how you do a course. So let's just talk about, and we've visited this on other episodes, but let's just talk about the value of kind of a diverse writing skill set for students.
One reason that I assign different kinds of writing to students is they are good at not APA writing. Especially if you're allowing them to do experiential writing, if you're doing journals, if you're doing things that have a very personal flavor, the level of writing elevates. And I would comment, as an example, I do a lot of writing in my positive psychology class where students have to do some sort of experiential thing, and then they have to do a reflection on it. And the writing is lovely. And that's from students that are not particularly great at writing. So I think that helps me remember that good writing is contextual. And if you're asking people to write from the heart without a whole lot of conventions, then you're going to get writing that is likely to move you. On the other hand, the more labored we are in layering on expectations that people write like psychologists professionally for journals, then we really have to keep in mind the novice to expert development. And individuals who come to us in college, they are novices. They know how to, most of them know how to put sentences together and use verbs properly and that sort of thing. And they need refinement help from us to be able to reach the levels of professionalism that we will want them to when they move into the workforce and represent your university or college as a consequence. So I, on purpose, take the task of teaching them to write well as that teachable moment. I've got an opportunity, if I need information from them, to say, put that in a business memo to me, please, and make sure that it's good grammar and complete sentences. And here's what happens in a business memo. So now my students can go into a module that I have in Canvas called the Communication Toolbox and look at models, or they can look at other ways to say awesome, or they can look at the mistakes that people tend to make, that they have a variety of things that they can look at if they're serious about wanting to become better writers. Do all the students pay attention to that? No. Do a minority? Yeah. And the minority of students, I think, benefit from the extra trouble I go to. But I want to make sure that if there's even an inkling of a student getting the goal of them becoming a better writer, then I want to be able to support that.
Making those kinds of resources available to students, I think, is so important because it can be a lifeline to students who are kind of out there and kind of flailing. And when I think about how I design courses, I think I used to design courses to the 4.0 student. I mean, I had really high expectations of my students, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But when you design a course that way, it really can leave students out there without much help. And so the student who was submitting an APA style paper in my IO course, it would be, well, let me just say this, that student's going to be fine.
Yep.
Those students who are already writing at a high level, maybe I could just ask you, how much do you cater to those students, and how do you deal with expectations? Do you just say, you're going to be fine, just do the course, and I'm not going to worry about you so much, and cater to the students who have less skill in that area? Or how do you manage that?
Well, I don't do that because I think that I'm not really earning my keep if I'm just ignoring the high-end students.
Yeah.
I do think high-end students figure out strategies for distinguishing themselves and actually making them hard for us to ignore them. Good for them. But I think one of the advantages of having an assessment culture is that assessment forces the issue of saying, what is the expectation for the majority of students? I don't think that means we're necessarily dumbing down our expectations, but if we think even in terms of the traditional 3-category range of, did you meet my expectations? Good for you, because you're going to do fine if you do that. Did you excel in my expectations? Whoopee, I smiled all the time I was reading it. Here are some pointers for how to improve. And then there's the group that doesn't meet expectations. So I think rubrics tend to drive us happily to the middle and allow us to celebrate the students who are doing really well anyway. So I think that's a good way to resolve that problem.
All right. You're the assessment guru. Now, I want to ask you a question because I've been reading about specifications grading, and one of the things that that spec grading does, and it's okay. Here's the simple question: if a meets expectation is meeting the course outcome or the assignment outcome meets expectation, should that student not earn full? Like, even if they are B and A students, should we separate out the B's from the A's? If we say, no, you've met this outcome, you've done what I've asked you to do we need that top tier of telling you that you've exceeded? Which, by the way, is what I do. I do a 3-bucket grading system too. So
yeah. I think we do still need the 3-bucket grading system. And I don't know if it's Eric Landrum's influence or not, but I'm less enchanted with using pluses and minuses now than I used to. Mm-hmm. But I definitely think for those individuals who are striving to be the best they can be, it is helpful to be able to endorse, yes, this is really top flight work. So I would hate to relinquish that and just say, all have won and all should have prizes. I'll quote a little Lewis Carroll there. Yeah, so I'd be hard pressed not to have that category to congratulate and celebrate students who are really knocking it out of the park.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What does APA style, and if we're asking our students to do it, what does it benefit? How does it benefit students? I'm not talking about students who are going to graduate school. I'm just talking about the students who are not even going to be a psych major. How does that, or they could be, how does that benefit them? And then what does it take away from them?
How it benefits them is it gives them a much stronger identification of the voice of science and psychology, why it is that when they're reading scholarly journals, there is a particular rhythm and a set of vocabulary and expectations that go along with APA format, that they understand the groove of psychological writing. And for those that go on to graduate school, they get to decide, is this a club that I want to join? I think that's a legitimate question.
Right. Yeah. And I'm recalling a conversation that we had in a previous episode where you need to, if you want to be good at writing, or we were talking about kind of getting a manuscript accepted into a journal or something like that, you need to read it. You need to understand that voice. In the same way, if you're having students read scholarly articles in your courses, then why not have them practice writing in that voice as well? It makes a lot of sense to do that.
Right. Even I think a scaffolding strategy to do that, which many people use, is go find an article, scholarly reviewed, _ scholarly reviewed, because that's increasingly a problem, and annotate it. Give me the APA, show me the reference in APA format, and then give me a summary, but make sure the summary is in your own words, because there's also, as we move students from novice to expert, one of the trends, the patterns that I'm fascinated by is how there are some developmental stages to students who get the voice, that they start out, they feel so incompetent to sound like a psychologist that they kind of cut and paste their way. They find quotes, and a paper is 80% quotes, and they figure that if they produce the paper, that's what you want, when that's not what you want. What you want is, let's see your translating ability. But I think we also have to explain that to students because they are still thinking of this as a kind of consumer operation. You want a paper? I'll give you a paper. I'll cut and paste it and hand it over to you, and then everybody will be happy. And it's like, no, you're missing the point. Why am I asking you to do this? So I think it helps if we are constantly supplying the why. Why am I assigning this particular thing? What's the point of this assignment? It's not just that I'm after you to do busy work, but there's a point to what we're doing. And in the case of writing, I want you to be as persuasive as possible in whatever pathway you take after graduation.
I so resonate with you on what students think we want from them, and from these assignments is different than what we want. And I always, that's when I hold up the mirror and I say, "Hey, Neufeld, you're not doing a good enough job of clarifying or communicating exactly what you're looking for." I had a thought about this. Oh, when you're dealing with undergraduates who maybe don't have strong statistics understanding, and when they get to that section of a journal article, they may not know what to do with that. And even methods, sometimes the methods are really, really complicated. How do you walk students through understanding those scholarly articles? Like, what do you ask of them when they're supposed to be kind of summarizing this study in their own words? What kind of guidance do you give them?
That's a really good question, because as you were asking it, I was thinking how many of our colleagues don't understand the statistics portion of articles. And that, I have to be honest here, that includes me. I mean, my statistical training is 40 years old, and a lot of what is now being practiced in journals, I have to Google, what's a Bonferroni correction? There are things that I just never learned. I can't say that I do a lot of that, interpreting statistics.
Yeah.
And that sheds some light on a problem that I see not just in my own program, but in others that I've done program reviews for, which is that our students graduate with psychology degrees and they have such a limited understanding of statistics that they have forgotten means, modes, and medians and standard deviations and some of the basics, in part because at advanced courses, we all just pretend that students remember that stuff and that we don't have to rehearse it. And so I will say that's one of the, to prepare students for the kind of reading they're going to be doing in my classes. I do explicitly dedicate a session to teaching correlation coefficients, how to read the graphs, what does this mean, when do we get excited about a correlation coefficient. And so I would expect students to be able to handle more consumer type oriented statistics as a function of being in my classes. I don't do much in the way of experimental kinds of things because that's not my shtick. But I think on the whole, we too often make an assumption that once a student has been through the class, they got it. The reality is once they've been through the class, they're going to lose it unless they practice it. And unless we're conscientious about going back and rehearsing. Remember we said correlation coefficients? Here's a correlation coefficient. Somebody tell me what that means. Should we be excited about this or not? How would we know? And I at least think that I achieve that level of more robust understanding because of that.
Oh man, I know this is not what we're talking about, but when you said we all pretend that, I wonder where else we're doing that. And I don't have a strong statistics background either. And I'll just say as well that when TOP taps me to review for them, I always have this kind of hesitance to do that because I don't know where. What I've been told by editors in the past is, hey, we're going to pair you with someone somebody's going to have that statistical knowledge. And so that's not what you're reading for necessarily. Mm-hmm. But it does feel like if you get two people who don't know their stats and they're reviewing an article, that could be problematic as well.
I think it could be, but I think the folks who run the journals where we publish are very good about making sure they distribute who's good at what kind of feedback. I happen to be really good at writing structure, and so I go heavy on that. If it comes to an article that I simply can't fathom statistically, I will say in the article, this is beyond my level of expertise, so please ensure that someone else is taking a look at that. I have taken that step.
Good. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this is just bringing up for me again. We need to have a conversation with someone, maybe editors of journals about that review process and what is required and what should be expected and what skills you need to have and how to communicate it. I think those are all really good things, but that's not what we're talking about. The second part of a question a few minutes ago was how does asking students to write in APA style, how is it at all limiting? Or what does it take from students?
It takes away their, at least they believe it takes away their creative expression. Because if they are being burdened by having to use active voice or having to avoid certain words or having to structure things in a particular way, then for students who believe writing should be uninhibited and spontaneous, then that's a suppressive force. However, I think people who've been around writing for a long time recognize that when you have a bit of structure, that tends to be a bit more liberating, because if you're going at a problem with some guide rails, I'm thinking about bowling, when you're teaching kids to bowl and you've got that contraption that allows the ball to stay in the lane, that can unleash a deeper kind of creativity that puts them in touch with the voice of what you're trying to teach them. But I think on the front end, it's really hard for them to see it as anything but tyrannical.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I had that bowling analogy in my head too when I was thinking about this question. I also thought about, and I may have mentioned this before, that when someone's improvising in music, they can't be all over the place. They still have to be in the right key, and so you do need that structure. And it is a skill. And so to the point of those folks who would say that that they're really committed to having students write in APA style. Sure, they give them a skill, even if they never go on to take more psychology courses. All right, so we've done this 6 or 7 or however many episode series on kind of walking through how to write for psychology from a kind of faculty perspective. I'd love to just quickly walk through some of those themes, maybe not all of them from a student perspective. I would like to know how, for example, you talk to your students about coming up with ideas. Is it different for you than what we've talked about in episode 1 or 2 or whatever, versus what you tell students about how to come up with ideas for writing?
Well, that's interesting. And maybe it borrows a little bit from the guardrail situation, that I usually give students a narrower field to play in. I don't just say, give me a paper, because God knows what they would produce. But a really good example of that is my capstone class, which I love to teach, called Psychology in the Movies, where I assign students to what I call a genre team. So right in the beginning, they have to pick a favorite genre, and they're going to be on team horror or team fantasy or team romance. And all 4 individuals on that team will be writing their own individual papers related to that genre. And so right off the bat, I've given them a constraint. And yet I also know I've simplified things for them, because they're going to be able to chuck a lot of what they would find in literature reviews if it doesn't relate to the specific genre that they're looking at. So I think the advantage of trying to, I'm persuaded, especially after COVID semesters, I'm persuaded about the power of giving students hub groups in classes to make them mutually responsible to each other, and to be able to share references, and to be able to peer review each other's work if that's something that is appealing to them. But students have indicated in their reviews of my courses that they've really enjoyed the level of support that they've gotten from their peers as a result of that.
So they are working with their peers on the assignment, but the writing responsibility is individual. They're all turning in their own papers.
They're all turning in their own papers. And when I'm face-to-face, I do dedicate class time to, I call it the engaging title discussion. Let's haul out some titles. What are you thinking of? And let's see if the whole group, can we punch up your title so that your title can be something that everybody wants to read. And so as a consequence, the titles that I get in my capstone courses, they look like professional psychology readings. I mean, they're very enticing titles, very non-boring titles. So I will spend class time teaching writing, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't see it as a sacrifice of content. I see it as the obligation that I have in building the skills that I've committed to in the students.
Yeah. So I've never done this kind of writing with students, but I really like it. This is why I love teaching, because good ideas are just everywhere. Where did you learn to do this kind of writing assignment with students where they're broken into groups of kind of common, a common task, and then they are asked to do it individually? Do you know when you started that?
I started that in particular when I developed the capstone course 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So that particular strategy, I can't say that I read it any place. It just seemed like a logical way to cut down on having wild diversity in the class, and then the structure just filled itself in. Yeah,
I always think I read a definition of engagement once, like what is student engagement? It's and it's 3 parts. It's engagement with the material, engagement with the instructor, engagement with peers. And I love what this idea does, because it turns students towards their peers immediately and brings that piece in, which is sometimes hard to get in the classroom because students really want to look to the professor so often. And so anyway, that's a gem. I hope people will use that. I think it would, I'm thinking about some writing assignments I have that students would really benefit from. And it's a kind of a small tweak to do something like that. And then I'm not needing to work with students individually. I have my ICAP at 33 students. Working with them individually on things like titles or topic sentences or something like that is exhausting. But working with a group of 5 of them, or 6 groups of 5 of them, much easier, seems like. So thanks for that little gem. All right. So for coming up with ideas, limiting, asking them what you want, showing them examples of what this looks like, is actually sort of freeing for them to be able to have less options to choose from, but still giving them options. Got it. Do you talk about? Go ahead.
Let me share one other gem related to capstone, and I'm going to give credit to my incoming undergrad TA, Ashlyn Doty, who's going to be working with me in capstone next semester. I was complaining a little bit to her as we're starting to plan about APA format and how hard it is to teach. And so she said, well, what if she wrote a brilliant paper, undergrad. She said, what if I take my paper and I put some errors in it, and then we let students find them? It's like, well, that's pretty good. So we now have in place one of the point value assignments on the way to the final product is find Ashlyn's errors. We give a title page, we give the first page, and we give the reference list. And she's been pretty clever, so we've set it up in an automated way that students just roll into Canvas and they can take and retake the test until they are happy with their score. But what an ingenious notion from an undergrad.
Yeah, so great. I mean, again, we're back to creativity. That's why this is like one of the best jobs in the world, because it's endless.
It is the best job in the world. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you talk to students about inspiration. We've talked about the muse, the creative muse. Or is that stuff that's not so helpful in getting students to the outcomes that you have for them?
I haven't talked with them about inspiration. And I don't know, would it help or would it make them even more afraid of the project?
Yeah.
So most students approach writing projects with, I have to do a writing project. Again, because they're thinking it's a product that they have to produce. And when that's done, then they're done, rather than here's another installment in becoming a better communicator. So I haven't talked about inspiration, but it'll be curious to see if that might be something that shows up. I mean, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, well, certainly, I think the most creative people have a lot of kind of foundational expertise or skills under their belt, and that's why they can be so free to do creative. And then we've been circling that for in a few conversations. What about? Yeah.
Let me just add one other thing. When I'm asking students to do literature reviews, I mean, what could be more boring than a literature review? So when I'm teaching my capstone class in history, I say, you're gonna write me up a history mystery. It's like, I'm gonna solve a mystery.
Yeah.
That is so much more engaging to get students involved. Like, what mystery would you like to solve is better than what paper are you going to write?
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. And it's the instructor responsibility to come up with this. And what you've done is you've opened the door for a little bit of inspiration. You may not call it that, they may not know it, but it's going to be something that's going to tweak their interest.
I hope so. And usually it produces some interesting papers.
And better for you to read down the road.
Yeah, better for me to read and smile as I read them.
Yeah. So. Which is your goal, right? That's your goal in good writing. Yeah. Make me smile. I love it. All right. You must talk about composition and organization with your students. And do you do that? Is it just constant feedback? Is there a point where you are like spending a day on organization and composition? And
I will spend, I'm thinking capstone would be the best example where it's a major project. I will spend segments of multiple classes getting them ready. So one class is devoted to a thesis. A portion of a class is devoted to what do we mean by a thesis statement, and what should that look like, and how does that set you up for what you're going to do. I do have one narrated slideshow where I say, this is what writing in psychology is like. Here's how you use quotes. Here's why you want to have a robust conclusion instead of just going, okay, that's it, which is a tendency for students to do when they're writing.
And what do you tell? Why do we have robust conclusions?
Because people are not always really good at understanding your takeaway. And so the message is, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them, and then you're going to tell them what you told them so that they will have maximum opportunity to benefit from whatever your message was.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great takeaway about just repeating your message. And honestly, if students can get that mantra in their head, then they are going to have better topic sentences. They're going to have they're going to just be more focused, which for me as a person, and we've talked about this before, when I write, I can get into the weeds and then I have to do this ruthless editing. And because I don't think anybody ever taught me that, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. I love it. Yeah. And by the way, good marketing, I've heard that also in business and marketing as well. When you're talking to a customer, it's just clarifying the message so that you really are saying what you want to say to them. So I jumped in on you there, but anything else for composition and organizing?
No.
Okay. All right. Revising and feedback. I think we can lump these in together for students. How do you prepare students for, because I think the feedback comes first, right? Withstanding feedback and then being asked to revise. So I'm sure you've seen feedback crush some students. I think you've probably seen some students just really energized by feedback because they want to get better. How do you approach this?
Well, I help them go through the rubric so that they understand the dimensions on which they're going to be graded. And usually that's a little bit, I'm going to say it's easier and scarier when I'm doing speaking rather than writing. When I'm asking students to do speaking, I will allow the first student who goes in presentation to earn bonus points for being the guinea pig and applying the rubric. And so the student makes the presentation, then as a class, we vote where that person should fall on the rubric. And usually it's students who are pretty sturdy that volunteer. It's usually not the folks who are desperate or likely to be bad. Usually they're going to be pretty good. But being able to see, here's the rubric, and look at the varieties of ways people are interpreting the rubric. I've gotten maybe one complaint about that procedure in my teaching evaluations over time, but I give sufficient warning to students. This is what we're going to do because I want everyone to be able to apply this and be pretty much on the same page about what we're seeing. And that also allows me to drive home. You want to have a good conclusion. Was there a conclusion here? How good was the conclusion? And so that may take a whole class, like one short presentation. Now we're going to do the rubric analysis. And now this is what's going to happen when you're doing your presentation. I'm going to be completing the rubric, and that's the process. So they know what's coming. And I totally believe that students who are serious about their work use the rubric to guide what it is they're going to do. And the ones who aren't, they aren't.
Yeah, I am reminded right now of the TILT framework that has come out recently called Transparency in Learning and Teaching, and we have an episode about that. Actually, I think Sue and I have an episode in our other mini series on it, and so folks should check that out because it's at the heart of what you're saying, which is, and I'm really passionate about this, and I'm not great at it yet, but I'm learning, which is my students need to have such clarity about how they're going to, what the criteria are, and then how that criteria is going to be assessed. And if they don't understand that, it's not fair to them. So I love that you are bringing them into the process, helping them to have your perspective. I always talk to students about how important it is for them to write to me as the audience, because they at the level that I'm asking them to apply things at, or in intro psych or something like that, they got to know that it's me. And so I want things written to me in certain ways. And so I'll talk to them about that. But it's about transparency. If you're asking students to do something and then they don't know what the target is, that's kind of unfair. And I think we do that more often than we would like to know with students. And the other thing I could think about in kind of a Canvas world, an online teaching world now that we're in, it's harder to have those presentations and then to do that group rubric feedback. But there has to be some way that you're bringing students behind the curtain to see it. And so I think maybe one way to do that is create a short assessment around it through Canvas, where you can ask them, hey, have you reviewed this rubric, and what do you make of these different levels? Ask them really pointed questions about it. At least then you're requiring them to get into to engage in this transparency process. Anyway,
I'd go back to my capstone class again. When my students do their presentations, one of the things I worried about in the online world is, how do I ensure that students actually look at student presentations? Well, I make an assignment for it.
Yeah.
So in their groups, they have to serve as a group of critics of how well the presentation worked, or they have to develop discussion questions that extend the impact of whatever the presentations were. So one thing or the other. And when they're in the critic mode, their job is to come up with, as a group, at least 100 words of criticism that would be helpful and developmental to the individual's presentations that they've seen. That guarantees that they're looking at the rubric. And then also has the side benefit of having them practice writing in a very different format that is quite likely something that they would be using in the workforce when they become managers.
Yes, job performance evaluation or whatever
Right.
it is, right? And I like that you're asking them not to go for the supportive. That's easy for students to come up with. I like how clear this was. Anyway, but the criticism,
Well, and I say specifically criticism is both positive and negative. I want you to highlight what you think happened that was good and what would help their papers be better. So my students present, and then they have a week to be able to build their papers and submit their papers. That's also a kind of interesting strategy, which gives me staggered deadlines across my classes, across 6 weeks. And students may come up with some very specific things. You know, when you presented arousal theory, it wasn't very clear. So make sure in your writing this up that you explain this better. So I think that's an advantage all the way around. I want to go back to one point that you made about your students who are writing for you. I'm going to say that can be confusing because students know you're smart and they know you know a lot. And so that introduces a challenge with regard to how much should they explain what they're learning, because you already know that stuff. So sometimes I think it makes sense to identify an audience like, explain this to high school students, or explain this to your peers in the residence hall, rather than explain it to me.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think when right now I'm teaching, and it depends from course to course, it's very different. So for intro psych, there's a lot of explain it to a friend or explain it to a family member who doesn't know anything about psychology. Yeah. I was thinking about my research methods course and how that is such a different sort of psychology course from our content kind of driven courses. And the students need to really think in so many ways quantitatively, and they really need to be concise. And so I might actually have them, hey, look at this experiment or design this experiment and identify the variables for me in this experiment. And so I will tell them, remember, I'm your audience. I'm the one grading it. So make sure it's clear enough that you're hitting all these things so that you're directing me. Garth, look here. This is where I am. This is where I clearly understand this. I tell them to use bullet points to make sure that they are clearly keeping me in mind. And so I think that both might be true, and it might just depend on the course. At the same time, I don't want to lose the wisdom of let's make sure that students can actually apply these things to their own lives and to the lives of people around them, or explain them in such a way.
There is one thing that we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
And that is in student writing, what do we do about plagiarism?
Oh, good. Yes. What do we do? Can you solve this for us?
I cry. It breaks my heart when students do that.
Yeah.
I have learned over time to make a distinction between what I call benevolent plagiarism or benign plagiarism, bad paraphrasing, and malevolent, where students are on purpose importing things and not giving sufficient credit. And for the most part, if you take that tactic, most of the errors that I see, especially in capstone work, tend to be of the benign type. But that's also frustrating because by the time they're seniors and they've written a lot, shouldn't they know the rules about plagiarism? And I shouldn't be seeing high percentages and turn it in. So I make a big deal on the front end about you don't want to have this conversation with me because it won't be pretty. And if I do think that there's a problem, then I'm depending on how egregious it is, I may give the student an opportunity to rewrite as long as I think there's a benign malfunction at play.
Yeah.
But if it's not benign, then stand back, because it's going to be ugly.
Yeah.
And warning usually takes care of most of it.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about at an intro level. In fact, in all my courses, I have a little module or a little page that just says paraphrasing is better than quoting. And as I'm giving my students kind of guidelines on ways to make it less tempting for them to cheat and plagiarize. But I think that warnings, giving them tools so that they don't maybe feel the need. Is that what I'm trying to say? I mean, okay, let me just put it out to you. What are the things that we can put into our courses that can deter students from plagiarizing? Or is it just going to be an odds game all the time? There's going to be some students who do it.
I think it's going to be an odds game all the time, but the goal is to reduce the percentage of students who engage in that. I think if you do the pacing that you're asking students to, that I ask students to do, I am less likely to see plagiarism because they've had a chance to think about things along the way instead of cranking out a paper the night before. I don't get papers that are cranked out the night before.
Yep.
And so that takes care of a lot of the problem. Also, in the excessive quoting, that's a developmental stage, a novice to expert, where students believe if I can show quotes and passages of other people who've written this really well, then you'll know that I understand what I'm talking about, when what we're really looking for is the interpretation. So I try to hammer home quotations are like salt. You want to sprinkle them really lightly, not overuse them, because it mutes the impact of what the purpose of the paper is. That goes back to your issue of transparency and the tilt approach, which I appreciate, that if we're clear about this is to help you write better, this is the purpose of this, to help you write better. If you buy a paper, that's going to improve your shopping skills, but it's not going to improve your writing skills. Those kinds of conversations on the front end need to be done explicitly and repeatedly.
So one of the things I hear you talk about is breaking the writing assignments down over time into smaller chunks and working with students on those. That can be a deterrent. Yes. I love that. I've heard it in our conversations today that asking students applied questions and interesting questions will probably be a deterrent for plagiarism. Yes. Seems like. Anything else? Any other deterrents?
Well, I've talked about putting them in some sort of circumstance where people can shame them and make fun of them. I joke about that. So I try as best I can on the front end to let them know how serious this is, that it is theft in our culture. Yep. I think it's also funny that, it's just our culture. It's not necessarily the way other cultures write, where collaboration is seen as a kind of compliment. And if you borrow people's ideas, that's building on other people's ideas rather than stealing. But we are stuck with our culture. And so we want to make sure students understand the dangers that they run into if they're going to engage in that kind of behavior. So I just be really clear with them. You will make me really unhappy, and you don't want to see me that way. I'm telling you, it's not pretty.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't want to disappoint Jane Halonen, that's for sure. Hey, I want to thank you for sitting down with me for this entire series, and then particularly for this very teaching-focused conversation today. I think is really, really helpful as we consider how to not only strengthen student writing, but to keep them from these barriers and pitfalls, and really navigate this. It's a complicated issue to navigate. Like content mastery and then skill development, which is really kind of what we're talking about here. Jane, any final words or thoughts about students and writing in the across the undergraduate curriculum in psychology?
Well, just in keeping with the principle of tell them what you told them, I would say the big thing to remember is that we are experts, even if you haven't been trained in how to write or how to give writing feedback. We are experts by virtue of how long we've been wallowing in the psychological literature, and our students are novices. And so rather than be angry at them for not being good writers, those are teachable moments that we need to embrace and take some responsibility for.
Well, that's well said. And again, thanks for doing this. And let's wait for that muse to come call us again. And hopefully we can find something else to talk about in the future. But I really do appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Garth.